the first thing about me that you should probably know is I'm a PK, which means a pastor's kid. I was adopted when I was 3 days old, and I wasn't just adopted by a Christian family. I was adopted into a family that was, my dad and mom were traveling evangelists all over the country. And so I was right in the midst of Christianity and church from the very beginning. And then when I was 3 years old, my dad moved to Oklahoma City and started a church. And so I grew up in church. The type of church that I grew up in was non-denominational, evangelical, conservative theologically, very conservative politically, kind of a mix between Baptist and charismatic. My parents grew up Baptist and they became more charismatic as time went along. Growing up, I never really wanted to be in ministry. That wasn't anything I ever dreamed of or thought of. Just like any young boy or lots of young boys, I kind of thought I'd be a fireman or something like that, or play sports. But my freshman year in high school is all that changed, and I really had this overwhelming sense, I guess you would call it a call to ministry. At that point in high school, I decided, okay, so I kind of know where I'm going with my life. I'm going to go to a Bible college, most likely. I'm going to go to seminary. I'm going to be a pastor. That was what kind of the plan was for my life. In 1992, well, in 1990, 91, my dad started a church, my mom and dad in Oklahoma City. And so in 1992, I moved back from California. I'd finished high school, done a little bit of college, and I came back to Oklahoma City to help my dad with his church plant. I was an associate youth pastor, singles pastor, then an associate pastor, and just kind of went up that ladder, I guess you could call it. During that time also, in 1995, I got married. I was going to Southern Nazarene University. I was getting my bachelor's in psychology. I still had this plan that I would go to seminary, but I was so busy with work and so busy with church, and I was full-time doing church already that the idea of seminary just went away. I had a couple of kids, and then in 2000, my wife and I, who's my ex-wife, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. My ex-wife and I, we started a church and in Edmond, Oklahoma. And so seminary kind of became a very distant idea. I was already doing the work, and so I just kind of was like, well, this is where I am, this is what I'm doing. Now, we got married in 1995, and in 2010, so 10 years after we had started this church in Edmond, which was going great and things were wonderful, 2010, what I call the darkness, the darkness just kind of caught up with me. And my own personal darkness, my own personal kind of the stuff in me. It wasn't like this overt, disgusting, sinful stuff. It was just the darkness. It was stuff that I had never fully dealt with. And that finally caught up with me in 2010. And my life exploded. Now, going back to the kind of church I was in, I was in, like I said, I was in kind of that charismatic, non-denominational, evangelical. It was almost like recovery and counseling and those type of things were really looked down upon in the church setting that I grew up in. And so I think that's part of the reason why I never really fully dealt with, because it was like, if you have problems, it's because you're not praying hard enough, you're not giving enough, you're not serving enough, you're not praying enough or tithing enough or whatever that is. And so in my world, in my Christian embedded theological ideas were this idea that if things are bad, it's because you're not being a good enough Christian. So it's not that you need help. It's not that it's that Satan is there and Satan is stronger than God at that moment because you're not doing something right. That was kind of where I was in my life. That's what I felt like. So I guess that darkness that I knew was there, I never really fully dealt with it. So it just started to explode in 2010 and then everything fell apart. And I lost my marriage and I lost the church. And I was in this place now where it's like, okay, what am I going to do with my life? I never lost the sense that I was not called to ministry. I still felt like, even though everything was exploding, that God had still called me to ministry. So I didn't know what that was going to look like or if I could ever do it, but I felt that. And one of the things that I thought was like, well, maybe I could go back to seminary. Maybe now's the time I could do seminary and kind of start all over. So I went to an Episcopal church, and I started worshiping there, and I loved it because it was so much more open and inclusive than the types of churches that I had been a part of all of my life. And I was on this track of really becoming a priest. My priest there at the church was encouraging me that it was time to go back to seminary and do that. Well, those things were exciting to me, and I was on that path, but everything was kind of a hard, closed door. Things were not working, and it was just, I was excited about it and I wanted to do it, but it didn't look like it was going to work out. And then some friends of mine who had started a church called Simplicity, which was a part of the Disciples of Christ denomination, asked me to come over and preach a little bit because their pastor was taking a sabbatical. And during all of this is a very short story of a long version of what happened, but as I was talking to this guy at Simplicity, he said, man, maybe this would be a great fit for you to come here. And I was like, is that an option? He's like, I think it is. And then he was surprised. He's like, are you even considering, would you consider that? And I said, yeah, I would consider that. I want to pray about it. So we kind of did some stuff, and it was quick, and it moved, and it happened, but the door just kept on opening. Every door that we had to go through kept on opening easily and quickly, and the church embraced me. And then I met with our regional minister here in the Disciples of Christ here in Oklahoma City. Her name's Pam Holt. And as I was talking to Pam, which was literally just weeks after I had come to Simplicity, she was like, you need to go to seminary. And I was like, I've kind of always thought about seminary, but I didn't know that was an option. And she goes, you need to go to Phillips. And I was like, okay, what's that? What can we do? And she's like, call Mary Ann at Phillips. And I'm laughing because I know all of you have probably had this conversation with Mary Ann too. And she said, call Mary Ann and talk to her and see what's going on. And I talked to Mary Ann. We had an amazing conversation. And she's like, yes, let's go. Let's do this. Let's make it happen. And like every door along the way just started opening. Now, what's amazing to me about that is so much of my life for 10 years has been difficult, has been hard, has been drudgery in a way in ministry and in my life. And in this moment when I came to Simplicity and I talked to Pam and I end up at Phillips, it's like every single step of the way there was no resistance. Every door was open, and everyone that was a part of it made it happen so quickly. And it's one of those things where I step back and I look and I say, this can only be a God thing. There's no other way that this could have happened. And not that God makes everything easy, but in my life, it was so obvious that this is how God ordained these steps and this path for me to show up at Phillips. And so as I look back, I realized that all the stuff that was even the darkness, or we could call it evil, even those things that were meant for evil, it's like I could see how God has used all of that stuff to line up this moment in my life. And just like it says, those things that were even meant for evil, God turns them to good. And that's how I got here to Phillips.